Today on Outside the Box Reviews, we are taking a look at the Jada Toys Creature from the Black Lagoon figure from their Universal Monsters series. Honestly, not sure if it's Jada Toys, I have no real clue. But yeah, they've released a line of roughly 6-inch scale Universal Monsters, doing Frankenstein's monster, Dracula, Bride of Frankenstein, and the creature here. I think under normal circumstances, I might be trying to snatch all of these up, but the distribution on these seems to be kind of wonky, and everywhere I've seen them, they've been going for more than what I assume retail price should be on them. And since NECA is also doing a lot of Universal Monsters, I'm not as, starved for Universal Monsters stuff as I usually am, because it usually is very few and far between. So I decided just to go with my Creature from the Black Lagoon collecting focus here, and just try out this figure and see how I liked it. So I got this at a local figure store that usually doesn't carry new stuff. It usually has a lot of 90s and early 2000s stuff. But I guess they just bought out inventory from another place and this was included in it. And it went for about $30, which definitely seems like a little too much for a figure like this. But even back in October at Spooky Empire, I would see some of the other figures in the wave and the Gillman was always sold out. So I figured I might as well just grab them when I had the opportunity. And I probably would not buy the other figures for an inflated price like that. So let's take a look at his accessories and we'll get into the figure itself. The figure really comes with 3 different accessories. The first is this net. It is relatively large, and I guess it's supposed to be able to cover the figure. And it is big enough that you could throw it over the creature and look like he's struggling with the net. His claws go through the weave of it pretty easily, so you can kind of have him gripping it. The downside of it is, I think it's just the thickness of the string. Not that I want it to be a lot thinner because it would probably break very easily, but unfortunately, once it's over the creature, you can really not see him very well through it. So while it could have been a cool accessory to see the creature struggling from within the net, it really just blocks him out more than anything else. So unless you want to do shots where you see him partly covered by a net or something, it's not the most versatile accessory you could have, which is a bit of a bummer for sure, but, it's a net. Next up, we have the spear gun that the scientists use on him. So it kind of has the trigger section back there, the spear across the top with the little 4-pointed arrowhead or spearhead. I assume that's the gas canister there in the middle. Some of the stuff on here, I don't really know what it's supposed to be. That looks like a magazine, and you wouldn't really have a magazine on a gun like this. There's also not a tube for the spear to go into. So I think the proportions and design of this may be a little out of whack from what they really should be. Not 100% sure. Actually, probably should have pulled up an image of the one from the movie, but it doesn't look quite right to me. It does have these glossy black bits of paint on it. The one on the handle is okay. The one on the magazine looking thing is a little wonky around the front of it. So it's really not the best made or painted thing. It's done mostly in a silver plastic. But the other part of this really is that it's not like the Gillman carries this. So, I don't know, it's really just going to probably sit on the floor of the display or something and not really be used unless they are coming out with some other human characters down the line. I kind of doubt that. And then last but not least is the Fossilized Hand, which actually has some really decent detail in it. You can see the webbing in between the fingers, the individual claws on there, the bones, the little tiny bones of the wrist. For being such a small piece, they really did a decent job with the detail. Once again, another thing that's just going to kind of sit on the floor or on the ground next to the figure, but it works well. I think it looks pretty damn good for the scale especially. So I'll just kind of one color, this tannish plastic. So maybe a wash would have brought out some details and made it look a little better, but not too shabby. For the head sculpt, I think they did a decent job on it. Once again, I think it's lacking maybe a little bit of shading, even though they have done a bit on here. There's kind of just an overall flatness to the face that makes it look a little cartoony, particularly the eyes. I can't even put my finger on exactly what it is that bugs me, but something bugs me here. But they do have all the little wrinkles you'd expect. The gills are nicely sculpted, and they do have some dry brushing of a lighter brownish yellow on there to kind of bring out the detail. There's also kind of a brown there on his cheek. They have the pink lips on there. I just realized there's a little random spot of pink there on his eyebrow that's probably not supposed to be there. The eyes are kind of that honey color with the black pupils in them, continuing that detail around to the back. And then it kind of goes into a darker green and a different texture there at the very back of his head. And then you could pop this head sculpt off. And we could pop on another one. And I don't like this one quite as much. It's just a closed mouth version of the other one. But I don't know, I'm seeing like a handsome Squidward out of this and less Creature from the Black Lagoon. I don't know what it is, but the face kind of just has a weird shape. The paint details, outside of the random bit of pink on the other head, they're pretty much the same. Same kind of dry brushing there on the gills, darker plastic there on the back. Overall, it looks okay. I think maybe not from the front. From the front, it just has something weird going on. But from the side, I think it does all right. Like, it's not bad like that. I don't know. The main torso is kind of broken up into 3 different sections. So the top one, we have kind of this darker plastic, it seems. Has a lot of heavy browns dry brushed over the scales there on the chest and also on the edges of the shoulders that stick out. This plastic is somewhat pliable, but not particularly like super soft or anything. So it doesn't seem to hinder articulation terribly, but it's not like the most pliant material in the world. You can see there are some scales up around the neck that kind of look like they need some detail. It's just completely lacking. It's just all the plastic color. If we spin them around to the back, the detail is pretty similar in terms of paint. We have the fin going down the back with a nice kind of yellowish tan going through it and the darker brown on the scales. The mid and lower sections of the torso are fairly similar to one another. A lot of figures and statues and things I've seen of the Gill-Man, and I can't remember what the colorized photos from the 50s show, but this section in the middle is usually like a yellowish, and here they've just kept it green. There's a lighter green kind of painted on there as a dry brush to kind of give it some contrast. There's a little bit of yellow on the left hip or our left side, but I don't think that's really supposed to be there. See similar details going around to the side of the figure, keeping on that lighter green dry brushing to bring out the details. We see the continuation of the fin in that middle section, and on the bottom section we have the split where it goes off to the legs. I don't know if it was intentional that they painted his lower torso in the back a darker brown. Never really wanted to think about the Gill-Man's excretory system, but maybe that's what we're seeing here. I do not know. But, you know, generally just kind of the same look throughout. The arms are decently done. A lot of the same kind of pattern we see in the upper torso. So it has that lighter green on there with mixed in with the dark and the kind of plastic tone, I guess. Almost in stripes going down the arms. So that doesn't look too bad. The pegs in the elbow are a little annoying since they are just that plain plastic and they kind of stick out a little bit, but they're not the worst. It's not like a Marvel Legends Spider-Man or something. Coming down, we have the fin on the back of the forearm. I feel like this could have been painted a lot better. There's a lot of just the green plastic shining through, even on the back side, and the left. His left is maybe a little better, but not great. I really could have used a little more like the fin on the back, which now that I'm looking at it, even this part's missing paint a little bit. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just missing paint a lot. The hands are decently sculpted, I think. The fingernails are stupid. They are way too blocky and bulky. This may be like a safety thing so that if kids got this, they're not like stabbing themselves with the claws, but they look pretty shit. And then the palm, no real paint detail here, but the sculpted detail is pretty nice. They did a decent job with that. His left hand is similar. This one has, at least on my copy, a good bit of brown paint around the knuckles. That's a little weird. I don't think it helps the look of the figure at all, but it's there on this one. And then similar detail on the palm. There is, for reasons I cannot really figure out, an alternate left hand that is kind of a gripping hand. So the hand is kind of closed around. Similar detail once again, more brown on the knuckles kind of going on. And the palm has very little paint detail, but a decent amount of sculpted detail. The claws are still pretty wonky. I was playing around with it, and you can actually get the spear gun in that hand. He holds it. I kind of feel like this may have been what they were intending to do, even though it looks pretty stupid and not something that would happen in the movie, but, you know, whatever. I guess that works. I don't really know who the market for these figures are. If it's for little kids, I could kind of see them doing this. If it's for adult collectors, I feel like this is stupid. So I don't know. Like, I would assume most Universal Monsters stuff, I don't think kids are really buying a lot of that or having that bought for them. But if I'm wrong, then maybe this makes complete sense just as a play factor thing. The other thing I did play with is you could kind of get him to hold the gun, you know, like he snatched it out of somebody's hand or something. So maybe you could do that, like he's taking the gun from the scientist to get it away from them. That's still not like the best look for the figure. Yeah, it's just kind of weird. And it's not even really like a good like swimming pose hand. Because at first I thought maybe it was something like that, like, you know, his more cupped hand while he's swimming, but that doesn't really work either, I don't think. Going down to the legs, some decent detail here. Kind of matches more the arms in that mid-torso section. You got a little more of the brown coming in, some of the darker green coming in. Looks pretty good. The fins on the back are pretty tiny. They don't go very far down the leg either, so there's not much going on there. Some I feel like the pegs are more forgivable in the legs, like they match the color around it a little better. Then at the bottom of the legs, it almost feels like he gets a little bow-legged. Those lower leg sections kind of feel like they're bent outward, which is kind of a pain. There's also a lot less detail in them. There's a little bit of brown paint in there, but not a lot of sculpted detail. And then we have the fin on the back that kind of looks a little janky there as well. And once again, feeling like it's lacking a little bit of paint, especially on this side. And then we got his big old Gillman feet, which are decently sculpted, and the toes on here look a lot better than the claws on his hand. Like, these actually have at least a somewhat, claw-like look and aren't just blobs at the end of his fingertips. So I don't know why they couldn't have done that for the hands. And then we do have no detail really on the bottom of his feet at all, but we do have peg holes. For articulation, the head can go side to side. We could tilt a little bit, hindered by his actual gills. The biggest problem is there's not a lot of up and down motion in that head, so you literally cannot get him into like a swimming pose. The sculpt itself hinders this, so there's no way you can even play with the joint enough to get a good swimming pose out of him. That's about as far up as his head's gonna go, which is pretty much not up at all. So that's a bit of a pain. Like, you can't even really, I don't think, get the body to hinge up enough to make him look okay swimming. So this is going to be a land Ben Chapman style creature all the time. Speaking of the mid-torso, we have a ball joint at the upper body, so you could hinge a little bit forward and back, actually a fair amount forward and back, a little bit side to side on a tilt, and of course you could rotate that pretty freely. The joint below it is pretty much the same, side to side, forward and back, maybe not quite as much as the upper torso, and then you could rotate that as well. The arms can rotate pretty easily up at the shoulder. They could also hinge out about 90 degrees at that shoulder joint, which is nice. As I mentioned before, this shoulder's a little bit soft, but when you get up to the top, it's going to have to push outward, and that's a bit of floppiness I wasn't anticipating. That kind of sucks. I barely had this thing out. Oh wait, no, that's the elbow or the shoulder swivel. Huh. Well, that sucks. So he has a shoulder swivel there. We have a double jointed elbow on here that can bend in nearly all the way, even though it looks pretty disjointed when you do. The other side, it's kind of frozen, so I'll have to heat it up and try to get it to move a little better. I think if you're using just one of those joints, it looks a lot more natural anyway. It just doesn't bend very far. All the wrists can swivel and then kind of hinge up and down, same axis on all of them. The legs are kind of on ball joints, so they will go forward a decent amount, maybe about just shy of 90 degrees. They will not go back very far because of the fins on the back of his leg. That's just a common problem with any creature sculpt you find. They'll go out to the side maybe about 45 degrees. Not too shabby considering the character. We have an upper thigh swivel that is nicely hidden between the scales, so I really like how they pulled that off. Another double joint here at the knee, so he has a really good range of motion there. Once again, a little disjointed looking when it's fully bent, but I don't really see many people fully bending this joint anyway. And then we have a hinge and a kind of pivot there at his foot joint. As I mentioned, this thing is a roughly 6-inch tall figure, and just as a size comparison, on the left is kind of a standard Marvel Legends, and on the right is the Mezco Frankenstein monster, which you have to remember that thing has platform boots on, so he's a little taller than an average character, but I felt like he was the most appropriate Mezco figure to compare him with anyway. So I think the height here is decent. I maybe would have liked him to be just a little bit taller, but I don't think, if you wanted to pose him with Marvel Legends or something, I don't think it would look too weird. So, of course, sorry when I go to film this, the light in this hallway dies, and I have to use the light on my phone to light up this whole display. But the whole point in buying this thing was to add it into my Creature from the Black Lagoon shrine, which is getting pretty crowded. It's funny to look at it and think of, how much of this stuff is pretty recent, like the Mondo figure. I think this is also from Jada, the bendable one, the Spinature from Waxwork, the Trick or Treat Studios bust, and this guy here. Even the Funko one is considerably older than the rest of this crap. So we've definitely got a lot more creature stuff in the last few years than we've ever gotten before, which is making me think I might need to be a little more selective with what goes into this display than I have been, because, yeah, it's getting pretty crowded. Overall, I think this figure is okay. I think if you collect a lot of Marvel Legends scale stuff, this is a great figure to have. If you want to include Universal Monsters crossing over with your Marvel characters or whatever. I kind of had that moment earlier where I was debating who this figure is aimed at. And it feels maybe a little too fragile to give to a child. Like, it doesn't feel as robust as a standard Marvel Legends figure or something. But the detail on it isn't enough to make it feel like it's meant to be, you know, a collectible for adults. So I'm kind of wondering if it's just kind of a poorly made figure for children, if that makes any sense. I don't know. Like, I think if you could find these things for $20 or less, they're a fun addition to your collection. I haven't really looked too much at the other figures in the line, but I would assume they're probably similar quality. So I would think, you know, if you can get them cheap, cool. I would not spend a whole lot on them because they just seem to be lacking in certain respects. Honestly, the Diamond Select creature from the Black Lagoon was one of my favorite figures in that line. I don't know if NECA is going to get around to the creature. I assume they will at some point because I know he's one of the big ones for Universal. And I'm curious to see how they will handle that and how the quality on that's going to be. Hell, at this point, all I've ever seen is their Frankenstein. I know some people are finding the Mummy and Wolfman, but I haven't gotten to check those out. So I don't know if those are what I'm hoping they're going to be or not. But I kind of feel like it might be a time where we just should wait for NECA to finish out their Universal Monsters and maybe not get too sidetracked on something like this. Still, he's going to go into my Creature from the Black Lagoon shrine, and he won't be the ugliest thing on that shelf. So, I don't know. I think I'd maybe overall say a not recommend, unless you're obsessed like I am. Then maybe go for it. I don't know. I was excited to check this thing out, and now I just kind of feel like nothing for it. So, yeah, cool. But anyway, that's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.